Welcome back to the weird and the wonderful with strange bones. That's me. And we are going to be carrying on with what we did in the last live and taking it to the next stage, explaining a little bit more and looking at a few more uh, ideas and things that may or may not assist us in understanding what strange things are out there and why it might matter. And of course, as we well know, uh, there's a great deal that is not explained, and there's a great deal that people seem to forget about, which helps to understand what we are even beginning to talk about in that regard. And there's a huge amount that can be uh, considered, if you will, and I think that it is fair to say that in a great many ways we need to understand what um, the aim of such things might actually be. So, welcome to Ben Burtis 5, and I hope you are having a wonderful evening so far. So we are talking about witches around the world as our next topic. And we are talking about what is it that we are actually even referring to. Now, we had a look at the traditions of witches in the US. And again, I'm going to remind everybody that we are looking at the ideas that people have about it, which I'm not promoting nor saying is even correct. All I'm saying is that we are saying that this is what people think and the results thereof. And we are also looking at what might be a better way to understand and classify what we are talking about. Now, by and large, I think that we can honestly say that there's a great deal that is either misunderstood or modified, and we have seen, in fact, as per our last live, where we had quite a lot of questions on the matter, that words change their meaning, and with it, our view of what we are talking about, which makes it necessary very, very often to be quite specific and careful of what we are understanding from a specific thing. So I thought we would finish off the looking at the witches of the US by pointing out the uh, differences with understandings that can come out of the concept. Now, in the modern age, we have quite a lot of views on the topic, and I'm not saying that those views are not valid. Quite the opposite, in fact. But what I'm saying is that there are views that are related to the modern age. And in the past, people may have had very different viewpoints on these things, which is quite important. Now, as we progress with this concept and understanding, we do need to classify the different varieties because it has a major effect on the world view. And in that regard, it changes pretty much everything about what is viewed by the practitioner and what other people might think as well, and whether or not we need to be worried about such a thing as well. So, to begin with, now that you have all joined in, I'm going to remind you that we have only one rule on this live, and that is to say that you have to be polite. You can agree, you can disagree, you can like, you can dislike, it is entirely up to you. But we do demand politeness, and if you're rude or disruptive, you will get the boot. But that said, we very much enjoy interaction. Comment as much as you like. If you would like to join the live, let me know, and I would be glad to add you as long as you obey our one rule. And of course, remember that we are able to do this channel entirely because of you. So like, share, subscribe, and do all of those good things that make it possible for us to continue. It only takes a few taps on the screen to send up those hearts, and it does us a lot of good. But beginning with that, now, we noted that up until very recently, and I'm not including neo-paganism in this just for the moment, simply because that's a modern view, and modern views require a modern consideration. But in the past, the view of witchcraft among Native Americans was that all witches were evil and bad. Now you might say, hold on, but didn't they do things like that? Well, yes, but, and here is the important thing. In the view of the Native American, what would be considered a witch was the bad version. Those who were considered to be good were given different names, such as shaman and similar. And they were the healers and the practitioners, yes, of what we can technically call magic, but they did it in certain ways and with good intentions for the betterment of the community, whereas those that were considered to be witches were the ones that did it for negative reasons. Now, with the influx of Europeans into the Americas, they brought their own views, and as many of them were very much Christian, of varying varieties, their idea of a witch was that it was somebody who was a worshipper of the devil. Therefore, of course, again, very, very negative. Now, this is in contrast to the modern view, where a neo-pagan witch or Wiccan is quite different, and very often they will say they are entirely good. Now, the way that things are characterized by the neo-pagan, I don't think is terribly helpful in our understanding. While it talks about styles and things, it doesn't deal with fact or form, which is what we are more interested in. So we are going to use what we have learnt thus far to categorize what makes a witch a witch. And there are three categories, in fact, that we can use. The first is the traditional theocratic witch. What I mean by that is that they have a deity. They are essentially a religion. They might not be a modern religion. They might not be one of the religions that most people understand or accept, but they are nevertheless a religion because they deal with a deity, which is obviously the very important beginning point, if you will. That said, the fact of it is theocratic, but the form will vary, and we will get onto form in a moment because you will find that there is a fair difference between fact and form, and they don't always fall into the same category. The second version, which a shaman is absolutely one of that variety, will be that which works with spirits rather than with a deity. And there's a few different varieties. A shaman is one, and this has a major effect on the viewpoints. We will find in South Africa, for example, they do much the same thing, and generally in these varieties of witches, either they do not wish to have anything to do with a deity, or they feel that it is not their place to approach a deity, and that is to be done on their behalf by the spirits with which they work. Now, again, you have quite a few different varieties of spirits, and that also characterizes much of what is done. There are the spirits of the world, the varying varieties of spirits that exist within our cosmos, within the spirit realm, but which are not considered to be God as such, in whatever form God might appeal. Um, Rather, they are something from this side with which you can deal with that will work as an intermediary. In some cases, very often, particularly in South Africa, and I understand with the Native Americans it's very much also the case, they can be ancestors, so the spirits of your people, which therefore are wiser, older, and bring the community's wisdom together and channel it via the shaman to assist the people and to interact with the deities on their behalf. So, spirit based rather than deity based. Now, obviously, in real life, when we get involved in this kind of thing, you will find there are crossovers, places where both spirits and deities are used in some cases. Absolutely, this is something that happens. Um, but nevertheless, if we're talking purist just for the sake of understanding, those are two of the categories. The third category of which, so to speak, nevertheless attempts to recreate the spellcasting type effect, but without any outside interference. And we tend to talk of such a person as a psychic. They are using their own abilities and powers, uh, assuming that they have such. So that would deal with the fact aspect of what is a witch. They will use one of those varieties. The second characterization that I would add in is that of form. And form deals with the methodology. Now, we find with a great many of the more primitive varieties, which is not to say not wise or ignorant, but older. You're talking things where you have dances, chants, trance methods, and certain forms of what we will broadly refer to as alchemy, which involves the use of the mixing of items into potions for healing or other uses, which may or may not be purely scientific, though many of them are medicinal as well. So they are practical and non-interfered with by external forces, so to speak. So those are our three factual categories. Formal category being your first one is your traditional, with your dances, your chants, your spoken words, even music. Music has long been considered to be a magical art, in fact, in a great many ways, and for obvious reasons, I suppose. However, moving forward, you then got the category of what we would refer to as formal spellcraft, the use of words into specific spells, which crosses over again into not just words to create the sounds that direct the energies, but also to prayers, where your theocratic witchcraft will fall in. Um, Prayers of varying forms, whether they be benevolent or malevolent. You absolutely do have your kinds in that regard of form. But then beyond that, you start getting into things like the Goetic um, varieties, where it becomes a great deal more ritualistic, either solitary or in community, and also a lot more mathematical, where you absolutely do have specific formulas and things that are required to be exact in order for the things to work. Now, looking at the old Native American practices, those styles are absolutely of the primitive variety. And I reiterate, by primitive, I mean old, as opposed to the modern, more mathematical varieties. There's the use of varying incenses, such as your white sage and Palo Santo, and other such things. The use of sweat lodges, um, dances, chants, the singing, as it were, which we find in a number of cultures as well, different ones that also use that variety of chant and song to effect what they work. And indeed, when we get there, you'll find that the Galda from the Nordic tribes is literally that, the power of the voice. And the Vadlokker were translatable to spirit singers. So again, they would be ones that are using spirit connections rather than deities for the most part. Deities are considered to be um, last resort type things to approach because uh, when you get their attention is given, and you might not want all the attention. So spirits are a safer option for most. However, we do need to uh, talk a little bit about the modern neo pagan view of things. And the way they categorize things, I find to be um, somewhat odd. I don't. I think it refers more to style than to fact or form. So they will talk of a green witch, a kitchen witch, or a hedge witch, but by and large, those are all styles that have little to do with the actual activity per se or the belief system, and more to do with how the individual proceeds. We do know, of course, that neo-pagan traditions stem largely from Gardnerian and Alexandrian Wicca. The These days, people have run off, as is often the case with human beings, and created their own eclectic practices. So we do have a vague breakdown where they talk about the Wiccan faith, which tends to be a religion. It's nature based to a most degree. Um, They have deities, rituals, and their specific form of spellcraft. However, not everybody does follow that. And other pagan traditions exist which encompass quite a lot of different traditions, ranging from the Italian witchcraft to the Nordic crafts and more. So bear in mind that while all Wiccans are pagan, not all pagans are Wiccan. Now, there are a few that are witches that have no religious ties at all and follow other traditions that are not theocratic in that regard. Some of them even claiming, and I must admit I'm not completely certain how it would work, that their religion can be Christianity, Judaism, or even Islam, and yet they are also witches that work within that religion. I think that's a very specific viewpoint in that regard. Now, we also do have people who claim to categorize themselves by practice focus, which again I think is a style rather than a fact or a form. Um, so your focus, like traditional witches, which emphasize historical practices and local traditions, green witches, which are very much the natural world type, um, kitchen witches, which work a lot with food and consumables, which I must admit seems to be a lot of fun, but again, it's a style more than anything. Hedge witches, which are uh, said to work more with spirits and ancestors and such and shamanic influences, but nevertheless with a theocratic uh, add-on, which makes them a crossover between your fact types. Elemental witches, which specifically focus their style on the four elements of witchcraft, and cottage witches, which very much deal with the hearth and home. Now, there are also those who will separate their styles, which is in a certain degree valid, by practice. So your solitary, which work alone, coven, which work with a group, often a traditional group, hereditary, who follow family traditions specific to their family, and self taught, people who basically went out, found their own way, and did things in their own manner or form. Now, there are other considerations where you uh, need to talk about those who identify as grey, uh, which that specifically say that moral focus is not for them. So they don't aim to be particularly good or particularly bad, but rather they do what they do as suits them. You also have the modern version where what they are dealing with is modern things, quite literally. Um, Thank you so much for those likes. That's very kind of you. I'm always happy to have likes. Catherine, it's lovely to have you on board, and feel free to comment and more as you wish. So modern witches will incorporate modern technology into their practices, which I think is the next stage of evolution in a great many of these things, to be honest with you. And then you have those that are cultural, and these ones draw on their specific cultures for their traditions, your Celtic or your Viking or your Navajo, um, or your Hoodoo, simply because that's their style where they come from. But as we've seen with this, oh well, thank you very, very much. I'm very glad to hear it. The aim of it all is to understand what is strange and weird and wonderful that is out there, and try to understand it in a better way than I think a lot of people do. Um, so, as I say, fact and form is the best way to look at specific traditions and understand what they are uh, doing, more than just describing their style or something like that. Um, and of course, of the three varieties, you can absolutely see that it can cover any culture, which is why it makes it a better way to categorize with fact or form. And I've got to love the name there. Thank you so much for the likes. Suspicious looking apple. I think that is fantastic. That is absolutely a brilliant name. I do like it. Okay, so now we've categorized between what we can term as psychic, spirit, or theocentric. I do love saying all of these words. Um, as your three major varieties of craft, and we said that the traditional American Indian is very much the spirit variety. Ancestors play a very big deal for a lot of different reasons, but also the other spirits that are deemed to be out there either as allies or as enemies, um, and therefore are attended to. They are dealt with through a lot of different methods, as we said, such as your incenses, your songs, your dances, your sweat lodges. Music is very much a part, and drumming. Drumming is a very interesting thing and something that we need to keep strongly in the back of our minds, simply because you will find that it turns up in so many countries and cultures, and it shows that in its varying forms, the use of rhythm and sound is absolutely critical. We find it used, and I know I'm going to upset people by saying this, but very, very uh, strictly speaking, uh, a Catholic priest is a version of a witch. I know that would upset a lot of people, but if you're taking the view that the craft is basically the use of powers um, in some way or another, then understand that if magic is the crossing of articulate with inarticulate forces, then a prayer and a blessing falls exactly in line with that. That's what it is. And of course, they are traditional, they are ritualistic, they have specific modes of speech and words in order to achieve the blessings or whatever that they are doing, which shows that they form in a specific kind of theocentric uh, witchcraft. Just because we say, well, it's a mainline religion and therefore it's not like those others. Sorry, that's just being silly. It is exactly like those others in every possible way. It's just whether or not you personally believe in it. Um, am I religious? I was, and now I am not. Um, but I'm not an atheist. I'm not religious. And I am on my own little journey in that regard, looking for answers to a lot of different things. Um, I tend to avoid formal things and deity type stuff, but that's for my own particular uh, modes of doing. So when we start looking at uh, the slightly more modern, not modern, but slightly more, once you've got the Europeans moving into America, they are talking specifically about witches as Satanists, worshippers of the devil. Now, while you can be a witch and a Satanist, you need not be a witch to be a Satanist. And their accusations were very, very specific and in many ways possibly inaccurate or driven by other uh, needs, as it were. We can almost be certain that, for example, many of the witch trials were not about witchcraft at all, but about getting back at this or that person. Um, so the accusations stemmed not so much from the actions of the accused necessarily as from the fears of the accusers, uh, but it shows a different view. So I believe that around the Massachusetts area, it is in fact the Cree that are the Native Americans, and they were all accused of being Satanists because of their practices and religion. But of course, um, that was absolute rubbish because they were following their own Cree native spirituality. It had nothing to do with Christianity or Satanism or anything like that. But the accusations came from the viewpoint of those who were accusing, not from the practices of the accused. That is not necessarily to say that there aren't people that absolutely do that kind of thing. We know they do. There are such people. These things happen. But for clarification on that, so when we start talking about methods of witchcraft, we see that there are different ways in which people can do such things. There are different kinds of this kind of thing. And this does matter because it shapes our worldview. Um, among the uh, Native Americans, what they call a witch is specifically evil and negative. They don't call the good versions um, a witch, exactly the same as in South Africa, as a matter of fact, but nevertheless, we will get to that. Uh, their folklore and beliefs spoke of malevolent figures that could harm their community, and these were very much not the same as the medicine people who were the good ones. So they were not considered witches. Now you can again say yes, but witches don't necessarily have to be evil. Hang on, we're talking cultural view. In the modern age, there are changes, and the changes matter a great deal, not only from the point of view of the practitioner, which obviously is very important, but also from the point of view of the greater community and how they view it, because that will direct how they react and act towards a practitioner. So the social aspect does matter. Now, we see that even up till today, there's a great deal of fear behind the viewpoint of those looking at witchcraft. And a lot of people will tell you straight away it's devil worship, it's evil, it's bad. Whether or not it has anything to do with what the practitioner thinks doesn't matter. This is about the viewpoint of those looking at. From the point of view of the modern Wiccan, they will tell you, no, witchcraft is a good thing. But remember, this is a 20th century view that only began at this very recent time. So it is not the same at all. Now, we know that all the different tribes, including ones like the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Creek, the Delaware, the Hopi, the Miami, the Natchez, the Navajo, the Seneca, um, the Arapaho, and more, they define their witches as the evil ones specifically. Okay. Bear in mind also, though, that this is kind of false to say in a way because we're using an English word that they would never use. They would talk of a shaman as a good one, and they have other words for the bad ones. We just use witch in the modern age to define the bad ones. They were considered to be criminals, and to practice was a crime punishable even by death. So some communities have, nowadays at least, made it illegal to go ahead and execute somebody accused of witchcraft. And we see the same problem actually in South Africa when we get to it, which is our next one, where, strictly speaking, you cannot be executed for that. However, traditional views and actions very often do actually still occur. So it might not be um, an acceptable thing in general, but it's done. When did I become an agnostic? Well, you're asking for what is essentially, sir, a very, very long story. And I will tell you why, because I was raised Catholic, and I, in fact, was trained as a priest. I was a monk for 9 years, so very religious for quite a long time. And about 10 years ago, I moved out for all kinds of reasons and have stayed that way quite happily for a lot of my own reasons. So, yeah, it's one of those things, I suppose. So, in looking at I think it would be fair to say that. Are you surprised, Mr. Apple? Um, I think it would be fair to say that the view of a witch in this specific tradition, referring particularly to the bad ones, um, in general, would be very much the same as the viewpoint of the good ones. They work via the spirits and things. The difference being that the bad ones do bad things and are specifically aiming at doing bad things and will deal with bad spirits, thus becoming, for example, the Yinaglushi, which very specifically is something that happens when you do a sufficiently number of truly evil things in order to become that. And generally, you have to be quite uh, deliberate in your doing as well. Now, this contrasts very greatly um, with the medicine men, which is a catch-all term simply because every different group has their own name in its own language for their spiritual healers and ceremonial leaders and medicine men or women. So we have a catch-all term just to refer to those forms, and to a certain degree, I suppose it's true even in South Africa as well, because we do much same thing, though uh, you may make of that as you will. But now we've had a look at the view of what it is, we can say that the very broad view of what is a witch changes not only between different places, but even within a single culture, tribe, and community, um, where they will refer to one variety as not a witch, even though they are doing much the same thing in a broad sense, because of their focus or aim, which very much is the point. Now, having done that, we now are going to jump across to today's view, and you will find that comparing to the Native American tribes, there are a huge number of similarities, both in style and in focus, and it shows also a great deal of the worldview of those who are practitioners thereof. Now, again, we have that same dichotomy of meaning here, because I can speak of a witch in the modern age referring to a Wiccan, but I can also use the term to refer to an evil, malevolent person within the traditional belief. Now, the Wendigo is an interesting one. You see, your Yinadlushi is not a spirit or cryptid. It's a person that's become warped by their evil. A Wendigo, however, is a spirit. So a Wendigo was never human, but the Yinadlushi or skinwalker was once human. And that's very important as well. So a Wendigo is a Wendigo is a Wendigo, but a skinwalker is somebody who has become a skinwalker because of their approach to witchcraft. Now, in comparison here, we can talk about a similar set of things in South Africa. So your traditional, and I'm going to use a term that everybody hates, a traditional witch doctor can refer to a lot of things. You, in fact, have three varieties which are considered to be good. And then a fourth variety, which is the bad one, which in the traditional sense is generally referred to as a witch. The other three are not called witches, even though they might practice what is technically witchcraft, if you will. So we do have to be very careful of how we do it. So your Isangoma is your diviner who deals with the spirits by and large. Your Inyanga is more the local version of an alchemist, as it were, making varying potions for both medicinal and spiritual use. And then the third one, which is very little known about, are the traditional blacksmiths, who are also considered to have a great deal of power. And those are the three good ones, though they do tell you, of course, don't mess with them because they can, if they get uppity in ways that you will not enjoy. But the one that is specifically referred to as a witch, the bad one, is the Umtagati in Zulu. Now, of course, the different African tribal groups have their own names, just as the different Native American groups have their names. But by and large, they refer to much the same thing. This is in direct contrast to modern Wicca and the neo-pagan traditions, which nowadays are also starting to be followed in South Africa and therefore cannot be considered the same at all. And it really does make a difference. It matters. The difference is sharp and contrasted and very important. Now, in many South African communities, especially the Zulu, the term umtagati, or if you want the plural, abatagati, is used to describe someone who uses occult powers for malicious intent to harm others or to gain advantage. So, very specifically, they're the bad one. What is a Wiccan? A Wiccan, okay, so neo-pagan religions, starting with Alexandra and Gerald Gardner in the 60s, 50s to 60s kind of thing, drew on Old English craft and sort of remade a new religion based largely on the old religion, though the historical connections can sometimes be argued, with the worship of the older deities. Again, that can be argued historically, but they nevertheless did what they did. And amongst their groups were quite famous people, including Aleister Crowley and other such. But those two were the start, and you've now got two major streams of what is referred to as Wicca, which comes from the Old English word witcher. The double C in Old English was a ch, not a hard C, but in the modern age it's a hard C, so it's Wicca. And the Gardnerian practices follow one tradition, and the Alexandrian the other. Which is more right or better, I suppose, entirely up to you. And there are several famous apologists that nowadays are what form British witchcraft as such, but the same ideas have spread around the world and become very eclectic, I've got to say, with a lot of different deities getting inserted in. The traditional views had a god and a goddess. They were dualistic, with the goddess generally being primary. They were a matriarchal religion, a balance of seasons and more. And dependent on which bit you look at, would have different influences. These days, as well, you also have influences from other religions as well. So it does get very confusing in neo-paganism. I would say that you would have to do a heck of a lot of research to really understand the focus and all, but most of them are very much nature related, and cycles of the year, and the old feasts like Samhain and Beltane and that kind of thing. Um, it's quite literally a religion. Uh, Follow it, don't follow it, it's up to you. And huge thanks, by the way, for all those wonderful likes. I do appreciate. Um, but you need to understand, as I say, we've categorized our types by deity, spirit, and psychic. So Wicca forms part of the deity fact, with the form varying greatly, but largely being spoken spellcraft and ritualistic spellcraft. Very often community, but can also be solitary as well. So that will vary greatly. Now, in South Africa, where you see a very similar thing to the Native American in that it's very ancestor focused, but there are many other kinds of spirits out there, some of which might be good and some of which might be bad. And the idea of a benevolent practitioner, what we will refer to as the Sangoma, their job is to mediate with the good spirits, especially the ancestors, and protect people from the bad ones. Generally speaking, we do not directly approach God for varying different reasons, and we allow the ancestors to do that on our behalf. So it is an intermediate form of mostly spirit witchcraft with theocentric leanings, if you will, but not done by you. Now, what this means is that there is a huge importance to who your ancestors are. There's a huge importance in community, because those who have died are not gone, they are still around, therefore, and you better be nice to them, because they can come and give you a good swacking, even if you are still the one living and they are not. They are not gone, and they can influence. So this changes how you deal with the world. However, the bad witches, which we will call the Abatagati, because it makes it more sensible and clear for us. Um, those are the ones that lead to bad things, and community response, as we know, can be very, very negative towards them. And while it is no longer considered to be legal to go and execute somebody for committing witchcraft, uh, we do know, especially in the rural areas and in the cities, nevertheless, it happens. Um, Feeling is very strong in regards to this kind of thing, and they are considered to be particularly dangerous and bad, and therefore need to be eliminated. So it does elicit strong response. So we definitely do see that even in communities that not only condone the use of, shall we say, magic, but even support it, they absolutely are even stronger against those that use or practice negative um, forms of magic. So you have to be very careful when you are dealing with the varying things. Now, in the modern version, a very quick look around online will tell you very greatly that modern witches are quite free for all, and you will get those that consider themselves to be grave witches and more, and deal with the necromantic, which in traditional society is really and truly flirting with danger, because that's considered to be an absolute no-no. Um, so the modern views are changing, but we need to remember, and this is just perhaps a little thought to those out there interested, that you're dealing with a multicultural society, and even with one society, the different cultures will not agree on how to deal with things. Um, and if you turn around and say, but no, I'm a Luciferian, which is a philosophy, not a religion, and we know this in your head, a great many people will turn around and say, well, that's devil worship, you need to go. So you've got to be very careful about what is said, why it's said, when it's said, how it's said, um, just because most people don't necessarily understand, and quite frankly, don't want to either. Now, we do know that the idea of black magic or umtagati is very deep within South African culture, not only within the black culture, but even within the white culture as well, to a certain degree. And it can really and truly have a major effect on society. Um, Contemporary witchcraft in South Africa uh, does involve a fair number of different forms. So, as we've said, the African traditional is much more shamanic. There's drumming, dancing, singing, and the use of medicines and potions and alchemies and things, and absolutely a lot of ritual. Generally speaking, however, and it's perhaps just one of those things that is quite interesting. Um, Unlike in a number of the other countries, they do not generally have groups. You are generally considered to be an isongoma alone. It's your job to do your job and get on with it. You don't hang out in groups like you would with the English coven. Why this is, I don't actually know. But nevertheless, very much shamanic, um, ancestor focused, and all the rest of it. The modern Wicca is, of course, as we know, um, ritual spellcasting and connecting with nature and the divine, and can be group or solitary, as modern Wicca is worldwide. We also do know that there is a great deal of diversity because, well, South Africa is fascinating. We have so many diverse groups here that we have a lot of different things. And I do remember speaking once with a friend from the Hindu community who pointed out that there are certain people within their community that they do worry about as being worshippers of Kali in her dark aspect. And that's the sort of Hindu equivalent, if you will, and I'm being very broad, and I apologize to the Hindu community for doing it, but to understand, if you don't know anything about Hindu, they're the Hindu equivalent of a Satanist, the bad version, bearing in mind that Kali has so many versions of herself. It's not necessarily bad to offer reverence, it's bad to offer reverence to the dark aspect. So it does get very confusing in the way this works out. So we have a number of different views. Um, Now, what it means is we have to be careful of our use of words again, because if I say which, am I talking neo pagan, which can be good? Am I talking abadgati, which can be bad? Um, or what are we actually referring to? And we need to be clear in and of ourselves and to whom we are speaking with, which version matters. But do we have specific cases? Now, we do know that Zixam Da, in his Ways of Dying, uh, there's a whole section on the understanding of the impact of witchcraft on the Xhosa communities and the complex social dynamics surrounding um, the impact on people's lives in that regard. Um, Keselo Dacre's Quiet Violence of Dreams also examines the role of witchcraft in shaping identity and power relations, not just within their own community, but between the different kinds of communities in this country, which shows the dynamic and the difficulties faced with the views thereon. Um, so we have that to consider. We also need to keep in mind um, how we approach these things. Just pulling up my notes again. So we've referred to our fact and form, and obviously Wicca in South Africa is the same as Wicca elsewhere, but in terms of the local traditional, your fact and form is very similar to the Native American. Um, so we will find that um, the the good ones use varying forms of potions, chants, dance, and all the rest of it. But you also have the bad ones, the Umtagati, or if you want the Sesotho, the Baloi, um, where they also use varying forms of potions and stuff like Korobela to influence and control people and more. Um, as well as curses and such. And of course, in this regard, our version of the bad stuff, as it were, is when an Abatagati gets powerful enough that can actually summon and control the Tokoloshi and therefore send it out to do terrible things on their behalf. And it would seem at least that the Tokolosh in general is very happy to do such things. That's their jam, as it were, and they will definitely have a go at that. And therefore, whenever the Tokolosh does turn up, or is said to have turned up, it absolutely raises the understanding that somebody somewhere is sending it and causing the trouble. Um, and then, of course, you have to bring in experts that will be able to tell you what is being done to you to remove the curse or whatever from you, and to find out who on earth it is that is doing it so that they can be stopped. And as I say very often, if it's gotten to that stage, the getting them stopped usually is a terminal case. Um, it is considered to be a very bad thing to do. So in order to do that, the natural modus operandi is, of course, you have to ask those who would know, which are the ancestors, who will tell you in a specific way. Now, understanding this kind of thing, uh, realizing that the African version do not generally cast spells as is understood in modern European witchcraft. Um, there are not specific words said in that regard. What happens is a ritual form and an enchantment, and possibly a sacrifice, and a divination speaking with the ancestors, and then requesting of the ancestors um, to intervene in that regard. So it doesn't follow the standard practices of spellcraft as is seen in the European world, but follows, as with the American Indian varieties, some kind of sideways around type thing in a way. Very often a goat or a chicken or some such is used. Um, in the terms of the Abhatagati, they may even use a human, but then that's considered to be very bad. And then certain objects are infused with power, be it a thing or a food or drink, which is then taken by the afflicted, uh, along with instructions of things that must be done to attract the right ancestors and appease them in a specific way to get rid of whatever has happened. Now, as you can very much imagine, um, this costs quite a lot of money, depending on what it is. And I dare say is open to a certain amount of abuse, though the ones that I have known myself, by and large, uh, were well respected, and they weren't the cheaty ones. They were, in fact, considered to be among the best in the country, and very often prospective students would be sent to them for the final training and testing. So, absolutely, there are different kinds of views, if you will. So, this is a big contrast in the traditional to the neo-pagan view of how magic works, where you actually cast specific spells, which is quite different. I find in the more European versions, enchanted items are less used, though they are, of course, as well. Um, Alchemy is often less used. It's not a really European thing in a great many ways. Um, Even potions, unless you're particularly of the variety that considers themselves a kitchen witch, it's not a big thing compared with other countries' witches, where it does become very important. It's almost a side thing by and large um, in the European, but certainly in the African views, it holds a strong tradition to the degree that dealing with the ancestors and such is done by the Isangoma. Um, and the Inyanga is particularly the one that does the potions and things. It's two important roles. And while I would imagine to a certain degree both of them can assist with the varying things, it doesn't mean that they are the necessarily the expert for that. So now we've looked at quite a few points of in the terms of the fact and form. We have to now look at the other side of the coin. Now, we saw that in the United States, there were a number of issues. We know that within society, traditionally, the Native Americans would attend to those they deemed witches. They would attend to them themselves and get on with it, so to speak. Um, but we saw even with the Salem witch trials, community involvement definitely went south very fast. So, what about South Africa? Have we ever had um, similar things? And the answer is actually yes. There are a number of things. Now, we know that we had in 1957 the Witchcraft Suppression Act 3 of 1957, which is an act of the Parliament of South Africa that prohibits various activities related to witchcraft, such as witch smelling or witch hunting. Um, and this act, in fact, is based on the Witchcraft Suppression Act of 1895 of the Cape Colony, which is in turn based on the Witchcraft Act of 1735 of Great Britain. Now, witch smelling is the way in which a good witch will smell out the bad ones, and it involves the use of powers rather than specific logic or science, and so it is kept out of use in modern law. It is no longer considered to be allowed, but it does happen. Now, unlike the European witch craze, where formal trials and executions dominated, the South African witch hunts were and are informal and nowadays illegal. Perpetrators are sometimes tried and sentenced by the legal system, but very often that isn't the case. It literally just goes straight off that we have deemed you to be the one, and then you get dealt with therefore. So that in and of itself shows a difference in how things have gone. Now I'm just going to see if I can pull up some specific cases just to give you an idea of how things go. Now we know that the province in South Africa where most of the witchcraft accusations and cases occur is in fact the Limpopo province, believe it or not. And it's been very prevalent. The Eastern Cape also has significant violence against those, especially against elderly women in rural areas, which is a problem, as you can imagine. It leads to violence and death and more, and displacement because of these things. And very often, as you can imagine, this is linked to social issues like gossip, jealousy, and economic rivalries. But there are certain cases where it's been linked to specific murders and even cannibalism, which is really quite terrifying and awful in that regard. So there's a lot to be said as to what may or may not have occurred. The apple is back. We are glad the apple is back. So specific cases are hard to find in South Africa, simply because it's dealt with on a community level rather than anything like that. Now, we know that witch hunting has happened all over the world, in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America, and more. And all kinds of accusations are brought against those who apparently are, we will just say abatagati to make it clear of what kind of witch we're talking about. In many cases, it's elderly women over 50 that have been accused of causing especially things like disease, impotence, souring of milk, and damage to cows, and murder. Now, one such case, as an example, was related to tuberculosis of the brother of the perpetrator. Another, the death of the culprit's relative, and to the third, the death of the culprit's brother. The first and third victims were literally taken out with an axe, and in the other case, it was through firearm. The case history and the resultant executions shows that the lengths to which it drives the community in their fear of these things. Now, there's a lot of argument, not just in South Africa, but in Europe and other places as well, as to exactly why the trials happen and whether or not things really are the result of sorcery. It's believed that in many cases that if somebody is capable, I many thanks, Karina. Welcome, welcome. We're talking witches. Am I going to be allowed to send you a jolly spell? It's awesome to have you. Very often we find in terms of those accused that there are other things that people want to do, or the person has become somebody that um, people are scared of for all kinds of other reasons, more than anything else. Um, every time she comes on, Karina laughs at me. I think she only comes on so she can laugh at me. So misfortune is absolutely considered to be the main problem, and it shows how social conflict is accused back towards other things. Yes, thank you very much. It's nice to know, at least to make your day. Um, in Swaziland, very often a jealous co-wife can be the source of negative witchcraft, abatagati, bearing in mind that polygamy is a thing among many of the cultures in South Africa. And of course, that shows how tensions in a polygamous environment can absolutely develop and cause varying amounts of difficulty. Let that be a lesson to you guys. One wife is more than enough. Now, elderly women who identified uh, who are identified, I should say, as witches may very much get punished for it, whether or not they actually did anything at all. And the problem is that you get a terrible strain between the legal system, of course, and traditional views of things, which is an issue. Now, in the modern world, we have changes in views of what makes magic magic and whether or not it's important. But I do recall a case with a friend of mine who was a Romanian witch, actually, uh, and a good one. So, absolutely decent, which matters. But her best friend was very much a traditional Malawian, and they consider witchcraft to be evil and bad and scary. And that was always a thing between them that, uh, much as they loved each other dearly, they were quite scared uh, of their friend. So certain things are hard to break out. We're going to look at a case now, but Karina's just told me she actually knew someone who grew up in Salem. So, Karina, were they a witch? Do tell. I'm now intrigued. Uh, I would like to know. and you see her every day. Okay, your friend at work. Be nice to her. You never know. She might do something wicked at you if you're mean to her. Is that the lady that I saw in that last video you sent me of you at work with your two friends? But yes, it absolutely can be a quite of a social strain, especially between cultures. And that's the other side of these things, that we do need to be aware that freedom of religion is all very well, but there's more to be said to it. So, in our first examination, with a post-mortem examination conducted on a 17-year-old woman in June of 2000, where she was accused of witchcraft, the alleged perpetrator's cousin, uh, brother, who was a neighbor of the victim, had been admitted with tuberculosis into hospital, and the victim was accused of bewitching him. The perpetrator had been consuming alcohol in a local shebeen, which, if you're not South African, is a bar, but an illegal bar, until early hours of the morning, and then came to the old woman's house. He knocked on the door. She had opened the door when called, as he was related to her even. On entering the house, he had questioned her and began to assault her mercilessly. A young woman who had been sleeping with her was also assaulted, but sustained only minor injuries. A child who had been with them was dispatched to call for assistance, and the patient was transferred to a referral hospital in Mthatha, but succumbed to her injuries in the same afternoon. And believe me, the injuries were exceptionally severe. It it was not a good thing at all. Um, the as I say, the axe was involved. The perpetrator was an unemployed, illiterate junior school dropout of 25 years of age with no siblings, an alcoholic and a cigarette smoker, if any of that matters. His father was employed in Cape Town Hotel, and his mother had been deceased for a long time. He stayed with the old lady that he, in fact, murdered. So, even within families, it can drive people to all kinds of things. In the second case, also a 2051-year-old woman was gunned down in her house in the evening. She had been in a room when a man had come to the house, had a conversation with her. A daughter had been with her at the time, but after a while, the daughter left. Then she heard a gunshot in the room. Returning, she found the mother lay deceased in a pool of blood. The conversation was that she was engaged in witchcraft, and as a result of it, this person uh, met an accident and lost his son. The perpetrator was a relative of the victim again, um, and he was around 30 years of age and an alcoholic. So, absolutely, again, you've got an issue where uh, people respond to this sort of thing very, very badly. So, it's taken very seriously, and therefore, the difference between a witch or abatagati in South Africa and a traditional healer or medicine person is absolutely critical. And now that you have the influx of neo paganism coming into South Africa, you absolutely have issues where people may have cross cultural misunderstandings and problems. And I think that it very possibly might lead to other difficulties because of that. Now, in our constitution, we have the right to freedom of religion, uh, which is exactly how paganism became a thing in South Africa. Early public activity include the first publication of the Penton Pagan magazine in December of 1995, and the formation of the Pagan Federation of South Africa, PFSA, in 1996. Now, while it is essentially the same as the UK-based version, it is not affiliated with it, nor with the international version, though it has had representation of those in this country. Now, they're a very diverse group, and most in South Africa, weirdly enough, are not coven members, but rather solitary practitioners. It seems to be a thing in this country. But with it, you also have varying forms of Wicca, eclectic witchcraft, heathenry, and druidry as well, which are the other modern versions of these things. And they absolutely do consider themselves to be witches. As is pointed out, paganism is simply a nature-based religious spiritual system of beliefs and practices which recognize and acknowledge nature as a manifestation of divinity. I argue that. That's absolutely a Wiccan viewpoint, not a pagan viewpoint, because other pagans don't have those viewpoints. But nevertheless, paganism is those whose diversity is a cause for celebration and not division, which was a quote from Donna Voss. And it's a lovely thought. I have no argument with the thought, I just don't think it's accurate. That said, we now have a growing number of people who claim to follow these varying religions and identify themselves in these ways. Things like pagan, heathen, witch, and witchcraft are reappropriated terms, and the historical versions thereof do not necessarily mean the same thing as the originals, as the modern versions do. So there's talk of things like reclaiming the word and rah, 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 but where it really becomes important is firstly what the practitioner thinks they are and what they think they do, and secondly what society thinks they are and what they do. And the conflict between the two can cause difficulties. Accusations of witchcraft can lead to witch hunts, and you've got to be careful of that. Now, in both cases, neither of them have anything to do with Satanism. Satanism is an entirely different thing, and they do not believe in the concept in either case of the devil as Satanists do. So, in that regard, you would be talking about an entirely different thing if you spoke of Satanism, not really witchcraft at all. Though Satanism is, of course, a parasite religion, such as it is. So it depends on your view. The difficulties as well that turn up is the fact that we are very much quite hardcore in Christianity in its various forms in this country, and that leads to a very strong negative view of anything that is deemed witchcraft in the negative way, and all of it is deemed in the negative way by and large, which means that you have a lot of difficulty from that point of view. So it makes it kind of hard to know where it all comes in and why. I will point out that, at least in South Africa, there are almost no black Wiccans. And I think this is entirely because either they stick to their traditional versions, or because it's considered to be a witch, it's considered to be evil culturally. So almost all neo-pagans in South Africa are white. It's just a thing, and it has to do, again, with the cultural views rather than any specific facts. It's a feeling thing. So it does also have varying um, effects on society because, for example, in order to get married, you can do it in court, or you can have an official religious minister marry you as long as he is a marriage officer. And traditionally, that meant a priest of some variety. So the question would be, can a priestess from a Wiccan coven, for example, marry you? And according to the Civil Union Act of 30th November 2006, the answer is yes, that actually can be done. They are considered to be officers because of their designation, not by their specific religious affiliation as such. Um, Previously, religious marriage officers could only be legally designated as such for the purposes of solemnizing marriages according to Christian, Jewish, or Mohammedan rites, or the rites of a Indian religion, in accordance with the Marriage Act, and therefore a pagan wedding ceremony was not considered legal. But these days, if you become a marriage officer and are considered official, nowadays a handfasting or Wiccan marriage is considered legal, which you might consider bad or good, dependent on your particular religion, belief, or philosophy of life. There are a number of registered organizations in this country referring to witches. And interestingly as well, and this is something that I think might be for a great deal of good. One of the biggest problems faced, and I think most people who follow the traditional African belief would agree with me, is that there is traditionally been almost zero control over um, who could or couldn't be an Isangoma or an Nyanga. And given that you're very often giving out actual medicines and such, um, you get a lot of cheats, fakes who'll chuck anything into a jar, and if you get sick, tough luck. So it becomes a problem. And nowadays, there are certain bodies that are getting together in order to create an official body of traditional healers, where you you actually are checked, tested, and certified as a genuine healer, um, according to the proper traditions. And what that actually does is it means that when you get a real one, you get one that's actually good at what they're doing, that has gone through all the training and all the proper testing, and as such, by and large, the medicinal herbs used are the real thing, which makes it a lot better rather than just some random junk in a jar. Now, this is very important for a number of reasons. Not only does it recognize and empower traditional beliefs, but it also legitimizes the practice. So when you get a proper doctor, you're getting a proper doctor, whether they're traditional or any other kind, which matters as well for the safety of people. But it also means that if you are a legitimately registered Isangoma or Inyanga, it means you're the real deal and therefore may legally practice and charge for your practice, which is an important side to things as well in bringing order and control to what otherwise would be a bit of a free-for-all, which does matter. I know for a fact that those who are properly trained go through a heck of a lot. It's no small task to actually be trained properly and to learn all the required things. And there's a lot of discipline. So it's deserved to be legitimized for those that have gone through it, or far more than just anyone who claims that they are or aren't. So that is perhaps a positive side of the view of the traditional witch in South Africa. Um, I know for a fact that I've seen one or two uh, people who say that they are herbal witches online, and I know a little bit about herbs and things, enough to know what not to poke, if, as it were. And I've seen some of these things. Oh, you must take this because it's good for that. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, yeah, nah. Uh, the side effects and the mixing of this with that will absolutely bring about varying kinds of interesting and worrying stuff. The ability to use natural healing techniques, herbal cures, and what have you, is an art and a skill, and also a science. And it's something that needs to be looked into very, very carefully and regulated properly. You don't just start whacking out medications to people hither and yon, because a great deal of damage can be actually caused to people, and that would be bad, um, and that's worldwide. So the fact that there's a legitimizing of things in South Africa, I think, is a very positive thing, and there are a number of incredibly good cures that they do, and they are not well known to Western medicine as such, and I strongly suspect we have a great deal to learn from the real professionals. And there are cures and things in this country that are pretty potent and worth knowing. So that in and of itself is a great thing right there. And I think should be strongly um, promoted. But as I say, by and large, the trials we have tend to be on the quiet and on the individual. We do know that there were a number of cases, I believe. The famous South African profiler, Minky van der Westhuizen, mentioned a case of a serial killer that she was profiling, that was doing it for reasons of Abatagati, and was after specific body parts for varying things. And several people actually were killed as a result of this. And it was a very distressing and problematic um, situation, though they got them. They caught them in the end. And of course, they were treated as all proper serial types are, and jailed forcibly for that very reason. Because, yeah, it's a serious issue, and you will find that the negative variety can go pretty far, and it can even involve such things as cannibalism and more, and it's a very distressing and damaging thing to any society, as you can imagine. So the bad kind can go very, very bad. But again, we see, as was happened in Salem, um, even those that apparently are trying to do good can end up doing a great deal of bad to the wrong people, purely out of fear and such. So we 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 can usually find that the victims are not the perpetrators. As somebody once said to me, which I thought was uh, a very amusing but nevertheless true thing, is if that person that you're accusing is that powerful, what in hell makes you think you can go and catch them? by the definition of you rocked up and picked them up just like that, they probably weren't the one causing the trouble. Just saying. Now, we do know that the police force even has an occult-related crimes unit that was established in 1992, and it was very Christian-based, of course. Um, and in fact, the guy who established it was known as the Hound of God, and he was apparently quite a severe born-again Christian that was very anti a great deal of things. Now, occult-related crime means any human conduct that constitutes any legally recognized crime, the modus operandi of which relates to or emanates primarily from any belief or seeming belief into the occult, witchcraft, Satanism, mysticism, magic, esotericism, and the like. Including in the scope of occult-related crime are ritual or muti medicine-related murders, witch purging, witch-related violence, sect-related practices that pose a threat to the safety and security of the Republic of South Africa and or its inhabitants, which is fair enough. So basically, any crime actually done that has as its source any kind of religious or occultic viewpoint absolutely falls under their view. And with this, we know then that quite a few things were investigated, but bear in mind that the original viewpoint was from a fundamentalist Christian perspective. So absolutely, there were times where things got a bit skewed. So, for example, the official website listed the 41 warning signs of possible destructive occult-related discourse, which included, and you're going to love it, gender confusion, playing any fantasy games, an interest in computers, an excessive interest in horror movies or heavy metal music, being depressed, gothic fashion, and so on. And yeah, this became what was in the late 1990s known as the Satanic Panic. And largely it was really not true at all. And it helped form a severe bastion of conservatism that if you didn't fit to it, you could be considered bad and therefore automatically a devil worshipper. So, absolutely, immediately, while it was not necessarily true, neo pagan practices were devil worship right off bat. He There was an interesting case of a guy that were accused of being involved in occult activities because he was a reader of strange books. Now, they don't say what the books were, but right off bat, you can see how hardcore things went. These days, it's not quite as harsh at all, but it is true to say that there are crimes that are committed that are genuine crimes, and they are committed for religious or occultic reasons. So in that case, there there is possibly a need for those who understand these things to be able to sort them out. But at the same time, you would have to say that the correct people should be chosen. And indeed, a number of senior SAPS officers have attempted to have the unit disbanded because of concern about dangers to the public from the actual investigations. These days, as I say, things have improved greatly in terms of that, and you are allowed to have a different view of your gender without uh, being arrested for it. Um, there are a lot of views on the different things. Um, Satanism in South Africa is characteristically against Jesus and therefore against what is good, and it is a belief system that guaranteed leads to crime. Now, fine in and of itself, until you realize that basically what is also being said is anyone who doesn't believe as we do is therefore a Satanist. And that right away is one of the problems where you will find that social views can be irrelevant to actual belief and lead to a lot of um, difficulties. So we absolutely do say don't commit crimes. Yes, great. But at the same time, um, whether or not all of the things they accuse of being part of that have anything uh, to do with it is dubious. Suicide attempt is considered occultic in the original view of this legal setup. Graffiti is occultic, um, which I got to say, I would worry about that. They do say that ritualistic abuse in a cult setting, yeah, sure. That I'm happy with because it's a crime to abuse. So absolutely, mutilation on and so forth is considered bad. Yeah, absolutely. Murder or human sacrifice, leaving evidence of occult involvement, sure, but it's a crime that's a problem that needs to be addressed rather than purely the view in that regard. And welcome back to Endless Thoughts. It is awesome that you have managed to stop by. Much love to you there. So you've got to be very, very careful when it starts to bring in religion into any kind of governance. Religion has no place in governance. I believe that very firmly. Um, a crime is a crime because it's a crime. End of story. I don't care what your motivations are. You are tried according to the crime and then dealt with and punished according to the crime, not according to uh, what you claimed your reason would be. I don't care if you say God told you to do it or if you just didn't like the guy. If you deliberately unalived somebody right off bat, sorry, that's a crime. End of story. Finish. Uh, Motivations and things in that regard, I find to largely be an excuse. Ah, my darling dear, it is still witchcraft, and we will be doing that for quite a long time. And I did come up with a lovely categorization method just for you, but don't worry because tomorrow night I will give it all again at the beginning so that people can understand. And I know it's late, so do not fear. You will not miss out, I promise. We will definitely be bringing up more again. Um, Now, we also know that a lot of so-called dark stuff is what we I would call teenage adolescence. You know, there is a huge difference from a dedicated and serious Satanist and the teenager that draws pentagrams on his pencil case at school and wants to be rebellious. And you do need to be very careful and mindful of this fact. Playing Dungeons and Dragons, I'm sorry, is not evil. No matter what people say, wearing black clothing is not evil, no matter what people say. So that's just acting out to annoy mummy. Is a big difference between serious involvement in actual occultic, malevolent acts and crimes. And this is very important to note. And by and large, we cannot claim that there is an occultic element automatic in that regard. And this is true worldwide. Now, a good example, just to give you some modern versions, Gert van Rooyen and his lover Joey Harhoff was suspected of abducting and unaliving several young girls who disappeared between 1988 and 1990. And in 1990, Van Rooyen unalived Harhoff and then committed suicide during a police chase. In 91, his son, Flippy van Rooyen, was convicted of unaliving a 15-year-old Zimbabwean girl during his military service. His death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment in 93. In 97, he said the missing girls were unalived during satanic rituals and were the victims of international child pornography rings, but no evidence of this was ever found. In 2001, he was sentenced to an additional 6 years for perjury for false statements he made about the missing girls and was paroled in 2008. To this day, nobody knows where the missing girls are. Now, right off again, I don't care what his reasons were. The fact that these things were done is the thing that matters, and where the police should be concerned with his reasoning, I do not care. You can say what you like. If you did it, you take the punishment for it. And your reasoning is entirely unjustifying. We also know that in 92, Dawn also was taken out in her home in Cape Town. And in 94, her daughter Angelique and Angelique's boyfriend were convicted of it. The judge rejected their defense that they were acting involuntarily under the influence of demons. Angelique received an 11-year sentence and her boyfriend got an 8-year sentence. Now, here again, that to me it makes perfect sense. I don't care why they did it or what influence they were under. They did it. And it was done deliberately. End of story. So we can see that there is absolutely a legitimate concern about any criminal acts as a result. But at the same time, we have to be very careful that we are not going to accuse of things in an unjustifying manner. And we should not necessarily consider all people who are practitioners to automatically be negative, the Abatagati type, because that would be entirely unjustified. And it does matter. And we have a number of connections to this where things have really gotten out of hand, both on the parts of the perpetrators of bad things, but sadly as well on the parts of those who were attempting, they say, to help. So there have been several cases reported of fatal exorcisms where people were considered to be possessed, and in the attempt to exorcise them, they eventually passed on as well. Um, there are a number of legitimate cases that were recorded with the police of this. Um, and it shows how this is a dangerous thing, even in the modern day. And we do need to be very careful and possibly a lot more understanding of how this all works or doesn't work, as the case may be. But that said, we have now looked at two countries and we see there are a number of similarities, there are a number of disparities, and we see that we do have to be careful about what we are saying about what thing. Um, Endless Thoughts brought up in our last live all the different words that refer to users of magic, and we've immediately seen that what it means has changed over the years, and even what it means is in dispute in many cases as well. So we need to know what we are saying and to who we are saying it, and what is being said to us and what they might mean, um, because it will change. And there is no specific universal rule where a cat is a cat is a cat. Pretty much everywhere in the world, if I say cat, we all have the same idea of what a cat is, but it's not true of everything. And when I say witch, it can mean a great many different things, good, bad, and in between. And that's sometimes even both and all three all at the once. And with that, we are going to end for tonight because we have kind of gotten to that point, and many great things have been discovered. And we are going to move on to another place, which might lead us to interesting and different viewpoints. And I don't know if anybody's got any particular place they would like done. We did the United States and we've done South Africa. Any particular place you'd like to hear of? I know Endless Thoughts is already going to be typing in as fast as she can, do Egypt. And I might just do that because there was a lot of very interesting things there in regards to the original beliefs and magics. And it was a very important part of the cultures. So we may just have to do that one. Um, but that said, she's laughing at me. You know this. Um, Brazil. Okay, Santeria. All right, I will take that. Brazil it shall be for tomorrow, just for you. Um, we will look at the magic of Brazil and with the witches of Brazil and see what people call them and whether or not they are considered to be good, bad, or in between. But until then, my dear friends, I think we have done a great deal and we have enjoyed it immensely. So, just as a final reminder, remember that we rely on you, so the liking, sharing, and subscribing all matters. And just as well to end off, I'm going to give for Endless Thoughts the three categories of fact and then the categories of form, so she can think about it and come up with lots of questions. So the categories of fact are the three forms of the craft, which is theocentric, wherein you have a deity. You have your spirit centric, where you deal with spirits, be they ancestors or other spirits, rather than a deity. And then you have your psychic, which is autonomous, dealing with no outside forms but your own abilities. Those are your fact, and then your form categories will include those such things where you are talking what we call primitive, which I don't mean basic or ignorant, I mean rather old, where it's very much a case of the use of music, dance, and chant type things, and very much tends towards your basic potions and the use of divination rather than direct spell casting at all. Your middle, which solitary will include spell crafting and some of the other things in a lesser manner as well, and ritualistic magic. And then, of course, your communal higher version where it's corporate with strong ritual types and specific formalized um, ceremonial things, which then evolves beyond into what I always refer to as the mathematic, where it becomes specifically ritual in such a degree that everything has to be exact. So the use like the seals of Solomon and such would be part of the mathematic traditions, um, very much so. Whereas your traditional Isangoma is part of the spirit version and primitive. Your Wicca would be theocentric but ritual. Um, and then, of course, your basic psychic skills. Very much you'll find similar to things within Hinduism and Buddhism, where it's all about the focus of the mind and the body to elevate yourself rather than get outside help. And we will get to that in due time as well. So that's for you. And yes, have an absolutely amazing night, my dear. Enjoy it immensely. I will find out more and see where we can go further with our examination of what is out there and what goes bump in the night. And remember, sleep sweet, sleep deep. Possibly keep that holy object near at hand because you never know. Sometimes those things that go bump in the night might very well go bump for you. Have a good one.